My name is Sean O'Brien. I'm the president and CEO of NatureServe, and many of the people on this call I know pretty well, and others I have met. And so I'm excited to have this chance to chat with you. And I'll go through the slides and talk about NatureServe, but also at the end, hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A, so you can put them in the chat. If they're urgent, I'll see it. I can answer them right away, or we can save them till the end. Just sort of depends. Maybe put a star on it if it's urgent to get the answer right away, and we'll go to it. But so as basically people know, I think a little bit about NatureServe. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about who we are and what we do, and then talk more specifically about things that are happening right now at NatureServe. So our basic agenda is to review who we are, what we do very quickly, and look a little bit about some of the impact that NatureServe and the NatureServe network has had in 2023, and some things that are coming up in 2024 that we're excited about. And then of course, how you can help NatureServe, and some Q&A along the way. So just as a quick reminder, our vision is there is a world in which the best available science informs conservation stewardship decisions so that biodiversity thrives. That is our broad vision for the world. That is what we hope for everybody and all habitats and species on this planet. And our role in that is our mission, where we leverage the power of science, data, and technology to guide biodiversity conservation and stewardship, specifically within the United States and Canada, but also more broadly through some of our programs that we have that are truly global. And so we think that this is really important. As we're all aware, we're in the midst of the 6th extinction. Species are going extinct faster now than at any time in history. And this is an ongoing problem, and we have yet to figure out how to really measure what the impact of that is. And so it's a little bit terrifying, because unlike climate change, we can't just simply model what's the impact of a species or dozens or hundreds of species going extinct the way we can model the impacts of carbon or carbon equivalents in the atmosphere and how that affects the weather. As hard as it is sometimes to predict the weather, I think it's easier than predicting the interactions of biodiversity on the ground. So we do this by answering 3 key questions. And many of you have heard these questions before, and they seem pretty straightforward and pretty simple, but they're absolutely fundamental to protecting life on Earth. This "what is it" question, it's sort of one of these ones that always amazes me, because you're in high school and you learn about the Linnaean system, and everything is in a kingdom and it has a phylum, and then there's a genus and a species, and we just name things and it's great. Except that it's actually not anywhere near that simple, because we're constantly discovering new things. We're constantly discovering that species that we thought were one species are actually multiple species, or vice versa, as we develop new tools for looking at genetics, or we just have more data about where things are. So the "what is it" question is really, really important. And I'm going to come back to it in a little while when we talk about our network and why this is such a big challenge and why it's so important. The "where is it" question also seems pretty straightforward, except that when you're talking about rare species, you can't just go for a bike ride down the C&O Canal, for example, and point out sycamore trees everywhere, because there's so many of them. If you're talking about things that are rare, things that need to be protected, "where is it" is absolutely critical to knowing what to do to protect it. And that often requires people on the ground, like Tim Howard in that photo on the right, on their hands and knees looking at things, and Andrea from Colorado over on the left, trying to figure out exactly what is going on the ground so that we know where things are. And that gives us information also about how it's doing, because when we know where it is, we can look at the threats and the opportunities for protecting that species, or the challenges for that species. And so these 3 questions give land use decision makers and conservation professionals the information they need to manage land to protect the rarest of the rare. And that's what we're all about. There's incredible work being done on landscape level issues and specific kinds of species and specific taxa. And our role is to focus really on all the species and all of the taxa, but specifically on the rare ones because they often don't get the attention they need, and they're at most at risk of going extinct, of course. So we have this network of organizations all across North America, all of the states and provinces, as well as the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Navajo Nation have natural heritage programs or conservation data centers, these entities that collect this data and share it with the broader NatureServe network. So NatureServe itself is a nonprofit organization that's headquarters is in Virginia. That sort of doesn't matter anymore because we're this continent-wide organization that has staff all across the continent. But we also work with over 1,000 conservation professionals in all of the natural heritage programs and conservation data centers across the continent. And that's this leverage moment. So, supporting NatureServe and the work that we do supports the work of these 1,000 conservation professionals. And what we know also is that they're also connected with their own networks within their jurisdictions, so that they're working with local nonprofits, other government entities, and landowners, and magnifying the effect again by another order of magnitude or more to tens of thousands of people who they collaborate with in different ways to lead to conservation impact. And so on the slide, we talk about 1,000 species assessed and 7,000 ecosystem types classified. We talk a lot about species. It's sort of easy, and it's the one that the general public gets the easiest in a lot of ways, but it's really important to recognize that ecosystems is an important part of the work of NatureServe and our partners, and it's a little bit unusual that we focus both on habitat types as well as on species. And NatureServe, together with a couple of other organizations, are the creators of the National Vegetation Classification for the United States and the Canadian Vegetation Classification System for Canada that allows us to define in a sort of Linnaean way the habitats that are on the ground so that we can determine what habitats are also at risk of collapse in addition to what species are at risk of extinction. And so the 100,000 species assessed is a really important number because it's always going up, and there's room for many more species in the system as we learn more, especially about some of the taxa that are less well studied, like beetles and various things. And over the years, the number of pollinators in our database has gone up tremendously. People are starting to pay attention to things like lichens and bryophytes and fungi. And so the number of species that will be in the database is just going to continue to grow. And you can imagine that keeping track of the taxonomy of those 100,000 species and more is incredibly challenging. And so in the 63 partner organizations that we have in the network, this is a little bit of information about their size. And this is why it's so important that NatureServe is available to these organizations. 12% of our partner organizations have budgets below $100,000. They clearly do not have the capacity to keep track of and understand what's happening with taxonomic changes across all taxa that they might be concerned with protecting in their area. And even the larger natural heritage programs are significantly smaller in terms of budget than NatureServe, and they rely on us to provide this information about what species are called, and making sure that when we're talking about species X in one location, we're talking about the same thing in another location. And that crosswalking is really, really important. Another question we get often asked is, who are these partners? And 80% of these partners are in their state or provincial government, sort of in the Department of Natural Resources or parks or game and fish in some way. 16% of them are at academic institutions, so they're at universities, usually in their state. And then that 4% is really just one person, Bryce Maxwell in Montana, who's at the state library, which is sort of a state entity, sort of not. So they get called out as a separate thing. And one of the things that's so important about what we do is we work with state agencies all of the time to make sure that we have the data that people need. But then who do we make that data available to? And our most important data partner in terms of giving information to them is the federal government. The federal government, obviously, gigantic landowner, manage enormous quantities of land, especially in the West, through the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service and Park Service and the Department of Defense, who are three of our biggest partners within the federal government. And recently, an academic paper came out where they asked federal employees who use biodiversity data in their jobs to manage species, to manage habitats and landscapes, what data sources they use and what data sources they were aware of. And this is sort of a wonky or technical slide, but the amazing thing that we were so happy to see at NatureServe is that we're the best known and the most used source of biodiversity data by the federal government. More so even than the one that the federal government created for themselves that they have subsequently deprecated so that it doesn't exist anymore. So the data that was in Bison managed by the USGS has actually now been transferred over to GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And so I find it a little bit interesting that the US government's database on biodiversity is now housed in Europe, not in the United States, where NatureServe, not the official government source, but is the source the government uses more than any other source, right here at home. So this is a really encouraging piece of information, though, that we are that well known. This data is a couple of years old, and I suspect that it's better now. We have been working really hard to build our visibility, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. And we've also been working more closely with federal agencies. And so I think these numbers have gone up some. So in 2023, I'm going to talk about a couple of little stories of things that we were able to accomplish with our network. But these are really not representative of actually the scale. There's so much more that we can talk about. And I want to talk about a project that we have where we hope to launch in the next year to get more data on that. In terms of our network, one of the things that we're all enjoying is the ability for people to get together again. And so we were able to host or co-host with our natural heritage partners meetings of people from all across the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada, and then the western United States and western Canada, to get together again and to share best practices and to understand what some of the regional challenges are for biodiversity data and what's going on in the different states and provinces. Because unfortunately, biodiversity is a little bit of a political football, and depending on the politics of the different states, different things are happening in terms of funding, and that's represented in the chart a couple of slides back with the sizes of the budgets of the entities. We could probably chart those to dominant political leanings in those states and see which ones are better funded and worse funded, and have some pretty tight alignment there. But what that means is that every time state government changes hands, things get challenged, can be challenged or improved in different states. And so one of the nice things is that NatureServe here is to provide some stability, and also that the people from the different states know each other and they can reach across state lines and get help and support. One of the ones we were highlighting here is Colorado Natural Heritage Program, and Dave Anderson, who runs that program, is on the line. The Conservation Data Explorer, which is also called Codex, which is a new environmental review tool that Colorado has implemented with help from NatureServe, been a really great boon to conservation efforts in Colorado. And we're not making any announcements, but Dave's really hopeful for some pretty significant support for his organization coming in from the state here soon to do surveys of Colorado, which is very, very exciting and sort of Oh, well, look, they got invited to submit the full proposal for that funding, so that's really great. And the Codex tool is part of the reason why they were able to do that. Connecticut similarly launched a web app using our environmental review tool framework, and this bottom one is a absolutely critical, just sort of like a little tip of the iceberg example of how natural heritage programs work with other government entities to figure out what should be saved in their jurisdiction. Whether it's Florida or Colorado or North Carolina, South Carolina, a lot of the natural heritage programs collaborate directly with the land acquisition entities within those states to advise on what land should be acquired to protect biodiversity and would have the most value. Virginia does this, and this is one of the things that I'm really excited about. Is we've been talking with consultants at Deloitte about launching a project to have them do a formal survey of the role that the natural heritage programs play in advising land acquisition and species protection across the United States and Canada, so that we can put a value on natural heritage data in terms of money that is spent acquiring land. And this study will probably cost $100,000, and so we have to find the funding for that. But we think that that will unlock a lot of investment in NatureServe as this leverage point in conservation across the entire continent, because so much conservation action depends on this data on species and habitats. And we just need to be able to demonstrate that in a more formal way than we have historically. Many of you have heard about and even participated in an effort to highlight the work of the natural heritage programs, because as much as NatureServe is not that well known to the world, although obviously well known in the federal government, the natural heritage programs are often sort of under the radar in their locations as well, because they're not the fish and game people usually, and so they're not working with the species that people are thinking about a lot, or in some cases they're prevented from talking about their work by their governments. And so we have been touring around and developing our relationship with our network partners and trying to tell their stories a little bit better. And so over the past 3 years, I have visited 39 programs across 32 states and 6 Canadian provinces. It doesn't quite add up because the Tennessee Valley Authority overlays several states, and they have their own natural heritage program within the Tennessee Valley Authority. So there were essentially 2 visits in the state of Tennessee. Quite fascinating what the TVA is doing, in fact. And we were able to tell the stories for some of the programs about work that they're doing and get media coverage for their efforts. And it was really great and really exciting, and opened a lot of eyes to things that are happening on the ground. We also have these what we call science wins, science successes. Not only does NatureServe employ a lot of biodiversity scientists, the network does as well. And we work together as well as with other academics to do research using the data of the NatureServe network to tell really important stories. Those might be about flower flies and the role that they play in pollinating and how imperiled they are. This word that looks like it's misspelled, river scour, it's kind of a weird word, but it's basically on the edges of rivers, especially in the bends where the water washes over the rocks, but still plants manage to hang on. And there's a lot of rare plants growing on the edges of rivers in these rocky habitats. And together with network partners, we published a paper on that. And we're very involved now with artificial intelligence through both Microsoft's AI for Good program, and also we've been invited to do some work with the Bezos Earth Fund, to look into using more AI for things like taxonomy and status rank updates. This is a developing story, and one that we'll be talking about a lot more in the future as we develop out this technology. You can imagine with 100,000 species that it takes a little bit of time to get through them. We did a internal look recently at our botany data and determined it would take 100 botanist years to review all of the species that are in our database, just plants, and update their conservation status ranks and make sure that their taxonomy is up to date. Obviously, we don't have 100 years to wait, and we don't have 100 botanists to do it in a year, so we need to leverage technology to do it more quickly, and that's a really exciting thing that's coming up. Also this year, we published Biodiversity in Focus, which probably everybody here has gotten a copy of or seen. This was one of the first times in the history of NatureServe that we took the time to really do this internal look at our data and determine what stories we could tell. There's a lot of detail in Biodiversity in Focus that I can't get into, but the headlines from that work caught the attention of the media, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the short answer on the headlines is over a third of plants and animals in the United States are at risk of extinction, and 41% of ecosystems are at risk of collapse, range-wide collapse. And those numbers really resonated with the media, both here at home and as well as across the planet. I think people thought maybe that things were a little bit more protected in the United States. So it was an interesting finding. We sometimes call ourselves nature's tech firm, and we do that because so much of what we do relies on technology to collect the data, manage the data, analyze the data, and then share the data back out. And we sometimes call this sort of our 5 C's of collecting. And some of that is on the ground with clipboards and pens and waterproof paper, but a lot of it is now done with phones and tablets and other devices, looking at individual plants or populations of plants, as well as things like remote sensing and drones and acoustic monitoring and other tools. But NatureServe doesn't just take all the data that gets thrown at it. And that's one of the things that makes our data so special, is it's really the gold standard of biodiversity data because it's curated and it's collected and reviewed by experts in the field. And so when an assertion is made that species in a certain location is a certain species, by NatureServe and NatureServe's partners, you can rely on that information. It's not just based on a photograph that may or may not actually have the diagnostic information to tell you what a certain species is. Calculate is sort of a shorthand for coding and doing all of the scientific analyses required to understand what's going on the ground. And then we've really ramped up recently our efforts at communications, whether that's our online tools that are available like NatureServe Explorer for anybody to look at, and just our overall ability to communicate this really critical information, because there's no reason to do all these analyses and find out all this information about these species if you're not going to tell people so that they can do something about it. And that leads directly into the conserve role, where we work with nonprofit organization, individuals, and government entities to help them make decisions to conserve biodiversity across the continent. I mentioned NatureServe Explorer, so that's explorer.natureserve.org, where you can look up species and habitats across North America and get really comprehensive information about them. Don't go to Wikipedia if you're curious about a species or habitat in North America. Come to Explorer and make sure that what you're getting is 100% accurate information. And then we have another tool called Explorer Pro, which is a little bit more of a map-based look into the data. And there are some public views that are available. But then also with partner organizations, we can drill down and get very, very fine scale information available to people for on-the-ground decision-making. And this includes not only hard data, but also the model output. So we do a lot of work at NatureServe, as well as our network partners, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to predict where rare species might be, so that we can do more work to protect them. We can go look for these populations in places where we haven't been previously and develop new range maps for these species so that we can do a better job of protecting them. And incorporating modeled data or model output into the data view is very powerful for conservation decision makers to see what might be happening on the ground. I mentioned the press for biodiversity in focus. These are just a couple of the big hits. Reuters actually reached out to us after we were in the New York Times last year. The New York Times did a full-page article on the map of biodiversity importance. And after that, Reuters reached out to us and said, hey, we want something like that. So we gave them the first crack at biodiversity in focus, and then it was picked up by over almost 500 media outlets, including the ones that you see here on the screen. According to those websites and the way that media is sort of pats themselves on the back, they claim that that's 1.9 billion people were reached by the articles about biodiversity in focus, which is a pretty significant portion of the earth. So we're excited about that because we want people to know about NatureServe and to know about our data and to talk to us and use the data for making better decisions. Biodiversity in focus wasn't the only thing that made it into the news. There was a number of stories that NatureServe was part of related to extinction, as well as the discovery of new species, as well as looking at resurrecting extinct plants. And so we've been part of this work as well. We're also, in addition to just the general media, we're trying to tell our own story more effectively using social media and using videos and incorporating our staff as well as board members and other experts in telling the story, and then working with partners as well and asking them to cross-promote our materials with them. And these numbers here represent engagement with these stories, and the engagement is what really matters, because when somebody engages as opposed to passively seeing something in their feed, that's when they potentially become supporters of the organization. We also do a podcast series that comes out every month, and we talk about the complete biodiversity of life on Earth. And so we not only talk about very specific biodiversity topics like bats with Winifred Frick and what's going on with bats, but we talk about the Endangered Species Act and what that means in terms of protecting species in the United States and its history and how it came to be. With Caroline Van Hemert, we talked about the combination of sort of science and adventure and being out in the field. With other people, we've talked about people in nature and how the diversity of people in nature is really important and how different people approach nature. So we've had a number of people on who talk about what it's like to be a person of color in nature compared to perhaps my experience of being in nature. The podcast that's coming out next week is with Rachel Tancock. She's the so-called nature educator. She went from having 0 followers 3 or 4 years ago on Instagram to having over 100,000 followers by doing these very authentic and natural sort of natural history or naturalist videos on Instagram. And she's also very popular on TikTok and other places. And so next week, we'll be talking with her about what it's like to be an influencer and what she tries to do and why she's doing the work that she's doing, trying to educate people about nature. So it's very exciting. We've had over 20,000 listens to Conservation Conversations over the past 4 years. And we're pretty happy with the visibility that gives us. And this effort at communications is paired with a boosted effort in our philanthropic work here at NatureServe. So the communications allows us to reach more people and to be more visible. And our philanthropy team is doing the work to leverage that into more attention from donors and more donors. And what's super exciting is this is comparing this year to date to last year to date in terms of number of transactions every month, and you think to yourself, oh, well, more transactions, probably that turns into more money. And in fact, it's true. This represents an amazing increase in the number of donations that are coming in every month. And that's paired with a similar percentage increase in the value of those donations that are coming in. So, we don't have at this point a huge philanthropic pipeline of people. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to build. We do have a nice set of supporters in the institutional giving with foundations, and we're really thrilled with the work we're able to do with them, because it allows us to focus in on really core pieces of what NatureServe does in a way that a contract with the federal government doesn't allow us to do. And it really makes sure that the data are the best possible data out there. So we're really excited about work we're doing with a number of small foundations and family foundations, and also with large foundations like the Hewlett Foundation. But so our donations are up 59% in terms of transactions year to year, and 57% in dollars year to year from individuals. And then what does this look like sort of overall for us so far in this fiscal year? Well, we're better than 50% towards our overall fundraising goal, both restricted and unrestricted money this year. Our absolute desire is to exceed our $1.7 million or $1.6 million goal for the year. The need is there. The challenge of extinction is not getting less, and every dollar we raise beyond that goes directly towards supporting the data that makes conservation possible. So we are absolutely looking to exceed these goals, but we're feeling really, really happy with our growth. On the last slide, you saw the pace of growth. I've been in the nonprofit sector for 25 years. I've never seen an organization grow its individual giving by 50% in a year. This is amazing. And the year before, we also had significant growth. We need to do that for several more years if we're going to break through onto the other side and be able to really crush the goals that we have in terms of protecting biodiversity, but we're on the path. So what's coming up in 2024? There's a couple of exciting things. One is that we're basically 50 years old next year. This is not a stock photo. That is an actual NatureServe scientist back in the 1970s using punch cards. You can't see the USGS quad maps with the stickers on them, but that was another part of the early years. And then in 1980, desktop computers were available for hosting databases, and that seemed like a real revolution, but it's nothing compared to what is necessary today. And then in 1988, we had the first true database that held the information on biodiversity across the United States and Canada. Today, those data are hosted in what we call a colo, or a co-location facility with servers that NatureServe owns. But by the end of this fiscal year, we will have moved all of our data into the cloud, and we won't have on-premise servers anymore. There will be better performance, better data security, and that will also give us access to more tools for analyzing the data more quickly and more effectively. And it'll provide better service to our data clients as well as to the network and their ability to put information into the system. We're also in that process modernizing the database to make it more forward-leaning in terms of the kinds of data that can go into it and the structure or unstructured nature of that data. We're really excited about this project. It's another one that's kind of challenging, to say to donors, hey, wouldn't it be fun to give us money to move our data into the cloud? Well, if you say it that way, no, it's not fun at all. But that's not what it is. It's actually a massive increase in the capability of the database to do the work of protecting biodiversity by making more data available to more people. And that's what's so exciting. The location of the data sort of doesn't matter. The database and what it can do is what matters, and that's what we're always focused on. Another thing that many of you probably have seen at some point was the old version of NatureServe Explorer, which was launched in the year 2000. We've done a huge update to that in the past couple of years, and we've got some more updates to that public view coming that will be supported by this move to the cloud. And then in terms of the network, we're excited to be hosting our really worldwide Biodiversity Without Boundaries conference, where conservation professionals come together and talk about the challenges of this work and best practices and learning how to do things better and be more efficient with the money and the collecting of data and the analyzing of data so that we can do a better job. And we're also updating and modernizing our core methodology training. This sounds a little bit maybe wonky and detailed, but there is a method for collecting NatureServe data that is really important because it provides a level of information and detail that isn't available when you just see a plant and record the location of that plant, or you see an animal and you record the location of that animal. Understanding about its habitat and population size and what's going on around it is really, really important for understanding what the threats are to species. And our core methodology provides that. And we do some core methodology training in person, and we're moving increasingly to synchronous and asynchronous online versions of core methodology training, because every year there are dozens and dozens of people who need this training. And it's too expensive to expect everybody to come to one location anymore. That process is challenging, and we need to engage some consultants to make sure that we make the best pedagogical decisions in terms of moving the system online. I talked about most of these except for the last two. The rapid assessment tool is a way to do faster updates to conservation status ranks, and conservation status ranks are sort of the key to NatureServe data. Most of you have heard of and looked at the Red List, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN's list of species and their imperilment status. NatureServe's conservation status ranks are similar to that, but for the United States and Canada specifically, and are much more they're much more carefully created because they're done individually and they're done by the experts on that species, and they're not done as much en masse. The IUCN ranks are amazing and they're great, and we are contributors to that list, and oftentimes the ranks from the two sources are overlapping and similar, but there's some extra information available from our methodology for conservation status. And so, but we're also trying to be more effective at updating those information more often because the pace of change on the planet is so fast. And then the Biodiversity in Focus has a lot of really great information in it about conservation status ranks and different taxa and all of that. But the document is static. And so we've just received funding from the Mitsubishi Corporation of the Americas to make those data available online in a more dynamic fashion. And we're really excited that this time next year, there will be a live view into data about these conservation status updates by taxa. So be keeping your eyes open for that. It's very exciting. We're also, of course, our scientists are hard at work on a million different things, including looking more carefully at pollinators across the United States. There's been a lot of talk recently about pollinators, and nobody knows more about them than NatureServe's network. And so we're putting out a paper on that coming up soon. And we're also working really closely with the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation on helping them develop some conservation priorities for the Western United States and Canada based on our modeling and our data. So using our map of biodiversity importance specifically for the West is a really huge opportunity for influencing the way a lot of conservation dollars are spent in the Western United States and Canada. We have in here this acronym SWAP, which stands for State Wildlife Action Plan. These are documents that are required by the federal government for each state to update. And that process is coming up here in the next couple of years for most states. It's done every 10 years. And the data that NatureServe provides allows for the swaps to be much more thoughtful and to take into account regional information, not just information from the state. And that's really helpful for decision making. The other thing that's exciting is a lot of the state wildlife action plans are now going to include plants as part of wildlife. And that's going to make a huge difference in the way conservation priorities are set in those states. And just quickly, we just signed a contract with an organization called PHMSA, which is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. It's part of the government, and they do work with regulating the pipeline industry. And they finally, after several years of work, have signed a contract to make sure that they always have the most up-to-date information available about biodiversity and rare species when they're doing that work. So we're really excited about that. And of course, none of this is possible without people like you and the support that you give us financially, morally, and in terms of data. So we are super appreciative of your support. We, of course, would love for people to support us financially or to connect us with people who can support us in all sorts of ways, with technology, with connections, financially, however it works out. The QR code will take you to our website so you can learn more about us. You can also keep track of NatureServe on all of the social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, and you can listen to conservation conversations on any of the podcast platforms that are out there. And we would love to have you following us and interacting with our posts there. That surprisingly is helpful in terms of being an organization that people are aware of, and we show up in their searches so that they maybe see us as an organization that they should support. So that's that's all of the slides. I just want to thank everybody for your time and for coming and listening today, and I look forward to taking any questions and seeing what people are thinking about as a result of listening to me for the last 35 or 40 minutes. Thanks again.
Thank you, Sean. And if there's anyone that has a question, feel free to use the icon at the bottom of the screen to raise your hand, and I can unmute you so you can ask your question, or just put it into the chat or the Q&A icons at the bottom of your screen as well. And feel free to ask questions about anything around NatureServe, whether it was presented in this slideshow or not. We're happy to answer any questions.
For instance, you might want to ask about our Adopt a Species program. We have a way for people to support NatureServe through helping to adopt species that we all should care about. And it's a nice way to give a gift to somebody who has everything already. Help them adopt a species to support conservation. Thank you, Bryce. You are correct. We have a long way to go, but it's amazing that 50 years in as an organization, as part of the Nature Conservancy originally, and now 25 years as an independent organization, that these data are available. It's a unique resource in the world, as you know. Dave's asking if the recent work with the federal government, that the survey results would be different now. I suspect that the answer to that is yes, Dave. I'm not sure. We have a copy of the paper, but I didn't dig in on their methodology. I'm not sure how easy it would be to replicate that methodology and get updated data, but given the amount of work that we're doing now compared to a few years ago with the government and the amount of media attention that we've gotten, I have to expect that the number would be higher. And yes, Rob was an employee of NatureServe for a good portion of those 50 years. So you helped us stay true to the mission. All right, well, again, thank you everybody, and happy Thanksgiving. I hope everybody has a good time here in the Washington area. We're having some gorgeous weather, so we'll get out and enjoy the last of the leaves before they come down. And thanks again for all that you're doing for conservation, because everybody on this call either works directly in it or is in the role of supporting people who do this work directly. So we really thank you for being here today and for all that you're doing.